Good evening, Greenville Avenue Saints, and those of you who may be visiting with us. We certainly appreciate your presence and you streaming with us for this last installment of the No Debt, No Sweat workshop. We appreciate you, and we want you to know that this session will have two sessions, and we'll give you a slight intermission between the two. But we want you to grab your books and please come and sit down as a family. We encourage everyone in the family to participate in this No Debt, No Sweat workshop. Before we get started, we'll have a word of prayer, and then Brother Steve Diggs will come and present on this evening. Let us pray. Our Father and God, we so grateful and thankful for this opportunity that you have blessed us to be together via this avenue of technology. Father, we're so thankful that you have sent Jesus to redeem us and to save us from our sins. And we pray to God that we would live lives that would be congruent with his will. We ask, dear God, that you would be with us tonight. We pray for Brother Diggs, that you would bless him, give him ready recall of the things that he has studied and prepared. We ask all of this in the name of your Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you much, John. I am so glad to see everybody here tonight. Tonight, we're back to No Debt, No Sweat. Tonight, we're going to be sharing two sessions. Our first session is the Getting Out of Debt session, and our final session after that, which is really the shortest session, but it is also one of my favorite sessions. That is the session when we're going to talk about how to get ahead, get ready for a dignified retirement, and all those good things. So I'm glad you're back. Let's get down to business. You know, all around America, we're having this battle about debt. And we're talking about debt, we're talking about credit cards, and we asked the magical question in this particular visit: are credit cards plastic prosperity, or are they plastic explosives? And I would submit to you that they can be plastic explosives if we don't use them the right way. You know, everywhere we drive these days, we see signs like the one you see here on the picture beside me. And you look at that right now, you think, well, Steve, what's the big deal? I saw 6 of those things driving home from work tonight. The other day, my son and I, we were out together, we were driving down the road. I saw this sign, and I said, Josh, I want you to get a picture of that. So we stopped, my son gets out, he shoots a picture of it. We drive down that same blame road, not more than a half a mile further, and there it is, a bus bench with those same 3 signs, boom, 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 3 times across. And again, you're thinking, well, Steve, what does this have to do with me? Well, what it has to do with you is the fact that we see these not only everywhere, but what it had to do that made it so interesting to me on that particular day. All of these signs were on Sunset Boulevard in the middle of Beverly Hills, California, right within yards of 10, 20, 30 million dollar homes. Folks, this problem with debt, it's deep, it's wide, it is ubiquitous. And don't think for a minute that just because you may be a low-income person that that's why you're in debt. I'm telling you, there are lots of multimillionaires that are up to their eyeballs in debt too. This is a pandemic nationwide. Let me just tell you, this is the session that I call the Steve Diggs Debt Amputation Station, because this is where we need to change some things going forward. So what I want you to do at home right now, I know that a lot of you are seated on your couches and so forth, but right now, put your hands under your legs like so, and lift your feet up off the floor about 2 inches. Let me get everybody over here to do that. Everybody get your feet up off the floor about 2 inches. Good, good. Hopefully that way I won't be stepping on anybody's toes in here tonight. I got you, didn't I? Because this, folks, is the kind of thing that has mowed my own toes off at the ankle about 1,000 times over. And on that point, let me just please remind you, as I said yesterday, I am not coming here to teach this material because I think I have all the answers. I do have some of the answers. I've worked at this for 30 years now. But we are all fellow strugglers, and we all have our issues. I'm just simply here to share some thoughts, some ideas that I hope will help us all be better people for God. You see, there was a lot of years in my life when I was making a lot of bad decisions. But these days, I have a totally different plan. I don't want to borrow money when I buy stuff. I want to buy everything that I buy on a simple 2-step plan. That is, I want to set it up so I have 0% interest, and also I have no payments forever. And the question, of course, is, how do we accomplish this? And the answer is going to be pretty simple. We tonight are going to learn how to pay cash as we go, turn this boat of extravagance around, take charge of our lives, and have some true joy going forward. Now, with that said, I want to share with you what I think of as the 7 stages of debt. And by the way, you're going to notice that the first 5 of these stages are very similar to what they tell us about the grief process. It's very similar. But people that are in debt frequently go through these 7 stages. The first stage of debt for many people is the stage of denial. This is when we know something's wrong, we're not getting along well with our spouse, we may not be sleeping too well, but we don't want to say that it's a money problem. We're just saying, you know, I don't know, my life's kind of messed up. We don't want to admit it yet. But that second stage is when we realize this is a money problem, but we get angry at everyone else. We get mad at our spouse for spending too much money. We get mad at our spouse for not earning enough money. This is when we blame the banks, the credit card companies. This is when we're looking for someone else to blame. But this is usually followed by the third step. And frankly, I think the third step is probably and arguably the most dangerous of all 7 of these stages. And this is the stage of depression. This is when that big black cloud sort of settles in over us, and we feel like there's no hope. We give up. And by the way, let me just tell you, this is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be. I was doing this seminar out in Las Vegas at a church a ways back. And after I'd done this session, one of the fellows in the audience came up to me and said, Steve, I'm in law enforcement out here, and we see this happen all the time. People from all over America will fly here, you know, on a cheap airplane ticket with a couple of $100s. They think that they're going to be able to gamble their way back to prosperity. And he said, of course, that one never happens. But then when they lose their last dime, I'm the one who has to arrest them for trying to cheat the house. He was the kind of guy that had to deal with those problems when these same people jumped out of those high-rise hotel rooms. Folks, this stage of depression is a demonic place to be. Depression usually, though, gives way to bargaining. I call bargaining the stage of false health, because this is when I'm telling myself some fibs. I'm saying, Steve, I'm going to find a quick fix, easy peasy, no fuss, no muss, get rich quick scheme to get out of this mess. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why they run those idiot infomercials all night long, because they know people that are in debt can't sleep. So here they are telling us how to trade stocks or flip houses or whatever. Listen, I have shared the no debt, no sweat message probably to well over 2 million people today in live audiences and broadcasts and in writing and so forth. And I have yet to have anybody ever come up to me at the end of a live presentation or send me an email and say, hey, Steve, I'm a millionaire today because of the books and tapes that I bought from that yo-yo at 3 o'clock in the morning on TV. Maybe the stuff works, but I have seen no indication that it does. Bargaining is not the solution, but bargaining usually gives way to the next step. And this is the step of really, I said bargaining, I meant to say that bargaining gives way to the next step of acceptance. Now this is when we really begin to see good health begin to return. This is when I start to develop those strategies, those skills, those disciplines that I talked about yesterday that will help us get out of this mess. And we begin to crawl out of that debt hole that we're in, like I talked about last night, and the fact that it's going to probably take 1 to 4 years to get completely out if we work hard at this. I had a sweet sister come up to me a while ago and she said, Steve, that's exactly what happened for me. When you were here in 2008, I applied those things. I was deeply in debt. And she said 4 years later, I was totally out. It changed everything. I'm telling you, you can do this kind of stuff. It is amazing how it really can work and change our lives. But this is the stage when we start putting that action plan of ours into action. We're going to begin to sell stuff, cut expenses, and work those extra hours that I talked so much about last night. We're going to get busy. We're going to start to change things. And this is the cool thing. In this stage of acceptance, we're making life differently. And we finally then come to the stage of resurrection. This is when we're out of the debt completely, and everything that is bad is over with, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. But that leads us on to the stage of rebirth. And rebirth is the coolest stage of all, because now we've not only crawled out of the hole, but we've got our head up above water again. We're sucking in some clean air for a change. Plus, here's the cool thing. Plus, we have built the emotional muscle by one pull after another to get out of that hole that we can now begin to apply going forward. And we can literally catapult ourselves ahead of all of our friends in ways that right now we don't even think are possible. Because after you've learned the strategy, skills, disciplines necessary to get out of debt, we keep on applying those same things to get us ahead of everybody else. And in another 5 or 6 years, your friends aren't going to even know you. You're going to be that far ahead, and life is going to be that much better. So, yesterday I told you I was going to come back to this, and today I want to. I want to talk to you tonight a little bit more about borrowing money. You know, as I said yesterday, there are two broadly divergent viewpoints among Christian circles on borrowing money. There are people that are out here saying, yeah, go ahead and borrow anything you want to borrow, build your kingdom. God wants all Christians to be rich. I disagree with that. I think that that is a completely pagan viewpoint. But on the other side, we have Christians today telling other Christians that all borrowing is sinful. And they'll actually go over here to Romans chapter 13 where Paul said, owe no man anything except to love one another. And they'll say, see, that's where the Bible says that borrowing is sinful. Well, folks, that is not even what Paul is talking about in context. What Paul is really talking about, he's telling Christians to be honorable about paying their taxes. And I think we can extrapolate from that to say that we need to be honorable about any of our debts. And I would go this far. I would tell you that if right now you've got a car loan, and if this month you've made your payments, then based on what Paul here is saying, you owe no man anything until next month when that next payment is due. You see, what Paul, I think, is telling us here is to be honorable. And for me, this is kind of a question of consistency. I get a little bit aggravated with some of these Christian teachers that say Christians can't borrow any money, when at the same moment those Christian teachers have a bank account. They've got a checking account, a savings account. Because remember this, the bank does not want your money to protect your money, does it? No. Why does the bank want your money? Somebody over here tell me. So they can lend it back out to you. Exactly. So how can I stand here and have the audacity to tell you that all borrowing is sinful when I have that bank account and I'm the very guy that is funding the system? You see the difference? And here's what I'm saying. We've got to begin to wake up and be a little bit more nuanced, I believe, in the way we approach this. Now, what I want to do for the rest of this session is hit a bunch of high points on about debt and overcoming debt. Unfortunately, I've got this much to say, got this much time to say it in. And as some of you have already noticed, I run at about 500 or 600 words a minute with gust up to about 1,000. I can never say everything I want to say. But the rest of this, I'm going to give you kind of a hodgepodge of things. I call this my leftover session. Do y'all have leftovers at your homes? Do y'all have leftovers? Yeah, we do too. And Bonnie learned something some years ago. She learned that on nights when she would say, Steve, we're going to have leftovers tonight, some of those nights I just wasn't coming home on time. And it was because I didn't want the leftovers. I was stopping down at the Subway to get a sandwich on the way home. Well, Bonnie got smart, and she quit telling me from week to week which night the leftovers are going to be on. But I can still tell. I come walking in the house, end of the day, dumb and stupid. Bon's in the kitchen, and the microwave is on. And there's like 6 or 8 little things floating around inside there. And Bon's at the fridge pulling out stuff that we did not like well enough to eat the first time. And she popped the lid on and said, I'll get him on leftovers night. Well, this here is leftovers night. We're going to be sharing some high points, some hodgepodge things dealing with debt that I hope you'll find helpful. Here is a great, underline that again, super great rule of thumb. Never, ever, 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 ever borrow money on a depreciating asset. That is a formula for failure. And what is a depreciated asset? Well, it's anything that's going to be worth less money tomorrow than it is today. And, at the top of that list are our cars and our vacations. I mean, we buy things that are going to go away, but we still owe the money. I mean, seriously, what is the sanity of going on a 2-week vacation, financing it with a credit card that you're probably already overloaded on, and then having to pay for that thing for the next 2 years? And of all the things that we're in a mess on, there are millions of Americans right this moment who are literally upside down on their car loans. Do y'all know what being upside down on? What is being upside down on a car loan? What does that mean? Exactly. That means that we owe more on the car than it's worth. Maybe we owe $15,000 on a car that is now only worth $12,000. And Christians, here's where we need to stop and take a breath. This is where Christians lose our integrity. It's when we make a commitment to pay something back that we may not be able to honor going forward. I mean, seriously, suppose you do get real sick and you can't work for 6 months. Suppose the boss fires you How do you sell the car for $12,000 and pay back the lender the $15,000 that you owe? This is where Christians get into trouble all of the time, and where we lose our witness in the community. So what do we borrow money for? Well, everybody's going to have a slightly different list, but I think some of the things that we could probably agree on, I think you can make a really great case for borrowing money on a home if you do it the correct way and do it conservatively. In our materials, we teach very conservative home buying concepts, but I think you can make a great case. I would tell you this: if you have a small business, you know that some accounts receivable are going to be in the next 30 or 40 days, but you need something right now that you've got to have, and you have some solid collateral, some assets that you can pledge against it, that you could sell if you had to repay the money. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I would tell you this: if you have some medical expenses and you don't have that Murphy fund together yet that we were talking about, and by the way, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about health insurance in a few minutes, but health insurance is critical. You've got to have health insurance. But if you need a little interim money for medical expenses, if you have to borrow some money, you just have to borrow some money. And finally, I would tell you that you can make a case for borrowing money on some used cars. But I want to talk to you about car buying now for a minute, and I'll just tell you, this is not a topic that has ever made any friends for me. I don't mean to be harsh, but I'm going to tell you the truth the best I understand it here, because this is important. This is where so many of us get hurt so badly in life. The question is, can I afford a new car? I mean, every one of us wants a new car. I mean, there's something in the Constitution that says we're supposed to get a brand new car every 2 years or something, right? No, there isn't, but we think there is. We all like new cars. And shoot, I've been known to go inside new car showrooms, sit down inside one of those suckers, and just breathe in that fresh new car smell. I like new cars a lot. But there are two things that an individual has got to be able to do before he or she can truly afford to buy a new car. First thing that I have to be able to do, I have to be able to tell myself the truth. Steve, you do not need this new car. Steve, you simply want this new car. What do you mean? Well, by definition, all new car purchases are luxury purchases. Well, what makes a new car a luxury? Hey, I don't care whether we're talking about a Cadillac or a Kia. These things are all luxury purchases because they drop in value like a rock. I mean, you remember Chevrolet used to brag about this in their advertising. You remember that song? Like a rock? Boom. That's what happens to the value of that brand new car. You buy a $35,000 new car, drive it off the showroom lot, and it's going to be worth about whatever, $26,000, $28,000. A year later, it's probably going to be worth around $20,000, $22,000. Folks, that is not an investment. That is a luxury purchase. Is it wrong to own a luxury? Not necessarily, but we need to first begin by telling ourselves the truth. This is a luxury. And here's the second thing you've got to do. Please don't get mad at me, but I'm telling you the truth. You've got to be able, before you can afford to buy a new car, you've got to be able to walk into that new car showroom, select the car you want, pull out your checkbook, write a check for the entire amount, leave the check behind, drive the car off, and never, ever, 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 ever miss the money. Simply put, if you've got to borrow money, you cannot afford a new car. But they tell me I can have a new, yeah they do. That's how the car companies and the banks stay rich. They're living in penthouses and half of us are living in orange crates eating off the floor. It's because they understand how debt works and they do us a number on that. And we cannot continue to play their game forever. So the question comes up, how do we buy a new car? Or how do we get any kind of a car? Let me tell you essentially how Bonnie and I did it. And I can tell you that we have not had a new car payment or any kind of car payment since the 1980s. And as I told you yesterday, my cars have been driving better ever since, okay? Essentially, this is what we did. Number one, you've got to forget your ego. This means I am not going to be buying my next car to impress people I don't know. No way. I'm going to be looking for a car that does the job, getting me from point A to point B. I'm then going to quickly save up a few $1,000s. Most people, if they get focused and serious on this, they can save $5,000 or $6,000 up in 6 or 7 months, and then I'm going to go out and buy myself a cheap beater, something that's safe that will get me around town. It may be painfully ugly, think pea green, but it's going to get me around town. People say, Steve, you don't understand. Sometimes I've got to go out of town. Hey, do what I've done going out of town. Sometimes I've got a nice car at home, but I'll park it sometimes, and I'll go down and rip me a car and drive that. I had to come from Nashville down to, I think it was to Lubbock a ways back. And I just went online. I rented a brand new car from Budget. Drove all the way down, came back, almost 2,000 miles, and I paid budget less than $200. Now, that was a special, but even at twice that price, it is far cheaper than you can afford to drive your own car. So there's nothing wrong with renting a car occasionally. But we're going to get this cheap car. Steve, am I going to drive a car like this forever? No way, ho. No, we're not going to do that. But what we are going to do is we're going to drive it for a couple of years. And during those couple of years, we're going to start making monthly payments to ourselves. I call this my paid for wheels account. Instead of me sending a check this month to Ford Motor Credit or GMAC, I'm going to send a check to moi. I'm going to send me a check every month. How much can I afford? Well, you know, the average car payment today is over $500 a month. Do that if you can. But suppose you can only pay, say, $250 a month. Great. Send yourself $250 every single month. If I'm doing my math right, in a couple of years, you'll have about $6,000 or $7,000 sitting there. Then what we're going to do, we're going to go out and take that $6,000 or $7,000 and combine it with that other car we have that's still worth a couple of thousand and step up to an $8,000 or $10,000 car. And then we're going to repeat this process over and over again until we gradually step up to the $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $45,000 car that we want. Now, folks, I'm just simply telling you something. This is the way that folks who get ahead, and it changes everything. Let me just show you how this would work out in the real world. Suppose that I've decided I'm going to do this, okay? And I'm driving around a car, maybe it's my second or third car, and suppose it's worth, I don't know, let's suppose it's worth $6,000 or $7,000 or whatever. And let's suppose that I now have in my savings account about $12,000, okay? And I go around, I'm looking for all these ads for used cars that are for sale. I check out the FSBOs. Does everybody know what a FSBO is? FSBOs are for sale by owners. And it may take a day, could take a month. But boy, one night I look down here, and here is an owner trying to sell a car like I want for about $18,000. Or I should say, the kind of car I want at a dealer would probably cost me about $18,000. But I see this individual that's wanting to sell it for $14,000. So I go over to his house and I say, could I test your car? And I get out, drive it around, have it all checked out. And I come back and I say, you have a wonderful car. I will give you $10,000 for it. And he spits and he sputters and he looks at me and he says, dude, I want $14,000 for it. And at that point, I simply say, what is the very best deal you feel like you could give me on this beautiful car of yours? And he looks at his car and he looks at my money and he says, well, I don't know. I might let you have for $11,000. So that day I write him a check for $11,000. I throw my $1,000 remaining dollars back in the bank. I start on my next car today, and I go drive it out of his driveway in a car for $11,000 that at any other point in my life I would have paid $15,000 or $18,000 for. Now, folks, this is the way the people who get ahead get ahead. And by the way, that was an interest-free deal too. This changes the way we do things. Now, all of this stuff is for a little bit later, but right now what I want to do is I want to show you how to become a millionaire, or at least encourage your kiddos to become a millionaire. This is important for us to begin to catch the vision of what life can be like if we do some things differently. The first thing we have to do here is we have to convince our teens to lower their sights a bit. This is when I come up to my teenager and I'll say, kiddo, you have a job, don't you? How much are you making there? And he says, Dad, I'm making about $300 a month. And I say, woo, that's really great. But I'm going to recommend that for, say, the next 20 months, every month we take $100 of that $300 and we put it away in a savings account for you. Now, by that point, we'll have a couple $1,000s. We're then going to put it into an individual retirement account and we are going to forget about it forever. And let's just see what happens. And let's just pretend that over the decades, this IRA has an average return of, say, 12% per year. Is there any guarantee of that? No, none whatsoever. But there are good funds out there that have 10, 11% returns over the years. Just play the game with me. So this young person one day will retire. And by the way, if you're much under 60 right now, forget about retiring at 65. That ain't going to happen. By the way, that law was made back in the 1960s when we were doing the government the courtesy of dying at 66 and a half. That's why retirement was set at 65. People today are living way into their 90s and even beyond. And there's no reason to think you need to retire at 65. I mean, I'm coming up on 70. I couldn't imagine wanting to retire. But nonetheless, here we are. We're going to have to work a little bit longer. But let's suppose this kid catches a break. This kid gets to retire, say, at 72. Now, by age 72, Mom, Dad, you're not going to be anything more than a distant memory, okay? You will have long ago assumed room temperature. okay? But your 72-year-old kid's going to be walking out to the gravestone, blowing kisses at your headstone, saying, thank you, Mom and Dad, because you turned me into a millionaire. Now, this is how we teach, we encourage, we focus, we mentor our young people to help them see what can happen. Now, that's all stuff for the beautiful by and by. We're going to be talking about that in our next session tonight. Right now, we're still dealing with the nasty now and now of debt. I need to get back to it here. Here is the bottom line if we're going to be godly people. We are people who must keep our word. Christians don't have the option of telling somebody one thing and doing something different. The Bible talks about this. The Bible says wicked people borrow, they don't pay back. Jesus said, let your yes be yes, let your no be no. Why is that, Jesus? Because anything beyond this is evil. So with that said, I want to share with you 6 things to consider if right now you're struggling with debt. Some things that might be of some interest, some things that might be of help. Number 1, make whatever decision you make about paying this money back with both prayer and the very best counsel that you can get. The facts are these. God knows our hearts. We cannot fool him. We might be able to fool somebody else into thinking that we can't pay back. God knows the truth. And Paul talks about how we need to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. This is serious stuff because in the final analysis, your decision is not just between you and the person you owe the money to. It's between, like I said, you and God. Very important that we do it this way. Number 2, when we're in debt, we need to be truthful. You know, they say the first casualty of war is frequently the truth. I think the first casualty of debt is also frequently the truth. You know, we need to be honest with everybody. We need to be honest to other people, our spouses, to ourselves. You know, think about it. If somebody owed you $100 and they were supposed to pay it back and they haven't, you wouldn't want to be out there having to hunt around to find them. You would want them to come to you and speak with you clearly. And that's what we owe to other people as well. Number 3, we need to exhaust every alternative before we even dream of asking somebody to write down the terms of the debt or something else. This means that we're going to do the tough stuff we talked about last night. We're going to do that 3-point steroid pack, selling, cutting, and working. We're going to work those second and third jobs. There's 168 hours in a week, and when we're deeply in debt, there's nothing wrong with using about half of those to work down our debt. I'm just saying that. I've done that myself for years on end. It can be done, and you can get rid of a lot of debt. There's no time for laying around watching TV and eating chips and watching reruns of Oprah. We've got to get up, we've got to get out, we've got to get some things going. We don't have money to waste on vacations. We're going to, like I said yesterday, do a little short 3-day staycation, and that's going to be it for this year. We're going to lower our expenses. We're going to do all the things that we talked about. Here's the 4th thing. When we're deeply in debt, we need to be available. This gets back to a comment I made a moment ago. You know, when you're in debt, never ever think about running away from a creditor. Larry Burkett used to say that it's best for debtors to run to creditors, not away from them. And here's why. If you don't communicate, that creditor is going to speculate, and he's going to speculate badly about you. Always be up front and center when you're dealing with a debt. Number 5, make a commitment to pay every penny that you owe eventually. Now, I understand that if you happen to already be in a legal bankruptcy, there may be some laws that you have to be aware of as to who, when, if, how you can pay. But our goal is to eventually get these things paid off and make the tough lifestyle changes that we really have to make. Because, again, we're not just trying to save our own good names here. We're trying to save the good names of Jesus. We're living in a world, and I know, that doesn't take promises very seriously. But we as Christians really, really should. And lastly, we need to remember that God is really close, and he's going to be there, and he's going to get us through. This passage that Paul wrote to the Corinthians has taken a lot of people through a lot of deep water. No temptation is overtaking you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with that temptation will also make a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. And folks, I have no way of talking about debt without also talking about credit cards. Credit cards have been the bane of existence for literally millions of Americans. At the time of their bankruptcy, many people owe at least 1.5 times their annual income in the form of short-term, high-interest rate credit cards. This stuff is so painful. So let me share with you 4 keys to dealing with credit cards, so hopefully they won't be so dangerous. Number 1, we got to remember that credit cards are so easy to get. There will be more than 5 billion credit card offerings sent out this year in the mails, on the internet, everywhere else. I think when I get home, I get about half of them every day. I mean, they're stacked up. we have to understand these are so easy to get, but we don't need to be taking advantage of a lot of these. Number two, we have to remember that credit cards are so easy to use and so easy to abuse. There was honestly a time I can remember when you get a credit card, you would put that thing away. You might use it to buy gas, but who would have thunk that you could use it to buy a car with or to buy this week's groceries? Or better yet, let's pay college tuition with it, okay? Now listen, please understand clearly what I'm saying. I am not suggesting that we can't use credit cards even for these three items I mentioned. I've done so. But what I'm saying is we don't finance things on credit cards. I mean, just think about it. I mean, I bought a car. I can remember this back in 2008. If you remember, 2008 was absolutely the worst of the economy that we've seen in our lifetimes. The stock market had crashed. There was hardly any money anywhere. Everybody had everything on sale. I'd had a car for quite a number of years. It was time to buy a new car. And I got to looking around, and I found a Ford Taurus that was well loaded for about $38,000. And I thought, well, you know something? I think I'm going to go over to the Cadillac dealership. And I did. And I went over, and guess what? I found a brand new, never titled 2007, 1 year late, or later, older car, a 2007 Cadillac. And the price on it was $58,000. Well, I just simply sat down and started using some of the negotiating techniques that I teach in some of my materials, and the salesman, didn't like it, and all. I said that's fine. But the long and short of it is, we finally got that down to $38,000 that day. Believe it or not, I've never heard of a deal like this. I've got the sales ticket to prove this. I'm not lying. $38,000. Then I reached in my billfold and I pulled out my credit card and laid it down. He looked at it and says, "What's that?" I said, "It's my credit card." He says, "We don't take credit cards." I said, "Okay." I picked it up, put it in my billfold, and started out. He called me back in. We went through that exercise again. I started out. This time he calls me in and says, "Let me get the manager." Now here comes the manager. He's going to show his salesman how to take care of me. And so the manager sits down. I pull out my credit card. He says, "We don't take credit cards." I said, "That's perfectly fine. I'm okay with that." And I began to leave. And would you know, I can't even believe this happened. But just as I started to go out that door, that sales manager remembered something. He remembered that they did take credit cards. And that day, I bought a $38,000 car with $38,000 on my credit card. That money was sitting in the bank, ready to go. I paid it a few weeks later. That was the end of that story. But I got 38,000 frequent flyer miles from American Airlines that made it possible for me to go to a seminar on. The point is, you can do anything you want to do with a credit card. Just do not finance your life with a credit card. That's so important. Third reason credit cards are dangerous, people just don't understand how they work. The terms, the interest rate computations, these things are murderous. If you want to really have a thriller to read one night in bed, get a credit card contract. These things are usually 20 to 30 pages long, and they are tough, mean documents. You need to understand what you're signing up for. And number 4, last thing that concerns me about credit cards is that credit card interest rates are so unbelievably high compared to so many other ways of borrowing. Now, I don't guess too many of you in here are old enough to remember this guy. There are a few of you that do. This was Jack Webb. He played Joe Friday on a TV show back in the 50s and the 60s and into the early 70s called Dragnet. He was a detective, and he was famous for coming in and interviewing somebody and saying, "Just the facts, ma'am." Well, I want to give you just the facts right here, right now on credit cards. The average balance per household on credit cards that are carrying credit cards right now is over $7,000. We have most of $1 trillion outstanding on credit cards nationwide. Every year there are about 1.5 million bankruptcies in America. And by the way, in some of the more recent years, we've actually had more bankruptcies in America, get this, more bankruptcies in America than we've had college graduates. Think about that. More bankruptcy decrees than college degrees. I mean, what's with that? Our goal, Christians, should be to be credit card deadbeats. That sounds like a weird thing to tell a bunch of Christians. But do you know what a credit card deadbeat is in the parlance of the credit card industry? Does anybody know what that is? Anybody over here know what that is? They call us a credit card deadbeat if we pay the whole balance off every month. They don't like you if you do that. Why? Because you're only making them a little bit of profit. What they want you to do is pay that minimum off and then pay all the extra interest all year long. That's what they want us to do, and they call us credit card deadbeats if we pay the whole thing off every month. Well, my goal, folks, is to be a big-time credit card deadbeat. I'm just telling you. The minimum monthly payment trap is what kills people with their credit cards. I like what Stephen Brobeck said some years ago. He was the executive director at the Consumer Federation of America. He said the low minimum payment, which barely covers interest obligations in many cases, convinces many borrowers that they are okay as long as they meet all of their minimum payment obligations. But I'm simply telling you that is not the case. I'm going to show you how this works right here. And again, I know people's eyes kind of glaze over when you start throwing a lot of numbers at them. I'll make this quick, but stay awake for the next few seconds. This is going to be riveting. Suppose you've got a credit card with, say, a $4,000 debt on it. That's just a little over half what the average household has, okay? You owe $4,000. And suppose you've made up your mind that you're just going to make that minimum payment every month. Okay, fair enough. What's the minimum payment on $4,000 going to be? Does anybody have a guess? Anybody want to throw out a number? Well, people usually say $100, and I say, you're right. And other people say $25, and I say, you're right. And I get all kinds of numbers. The point is, different credit card companies have different minimum fees. The highest fee that I'm aware of is 2.5% that has to be paid. Most of them don't require that much. Maybe some require more, but a lot of them require less. However, at 2.5% a month, you ought to be able to pay it off pretty fast, right? But what we're forgetting, and by the way, what is 2.5% of $4,000? Does anybody know? 2.5% of $4,000, it's $100. And again, we're thinking, hey, that feels pretty good. I mean, I know it's not going to be paid off overnight, but $100 against $4,000 isn't going to take me 10 or 12 years, is it? Well, the next thing we have to remember is that little thing called interest. And suppose this credit card has, say, an 18% interest rate. That's not unusual. And that's the equivalent, again, of 1.5% a month. So what is 1.5% of $4,000? Okay, right. That's $60. So do you see what's happened this month? We owe $4,000, we've paid $100, but $60 of that $100 went to pay them some interest. So this month I've made a grand total payment on my $4,000 debt of $40. And the rest of that money, $3,960, has just flopped over at 18% a year. Depending on your contract and your financial institution, that could easily take you more than 24 years to pay off that $4,000. Christians, this is why we have got to get smart and understand how this stuff gets played, because otherwise we're going to be in debt for the rest of our lives. We've got to understand the games these people play. So let me give you 4 tips on how to hopefully stay out of some of the trouble with credit cards. Number 1, I encourage people to get as few cards as possible. Many families only need 1 card. Now, you can argue that with a couple of extra cards you're going to improve your FICO score faster. Maybe so. But again, I'm looking for peace of mind. No more than you absolutely have. And why is that? It's because the more cards an individual has, the more spending, the more confusion, and the more of the avalanche of debt at the end of the month. I just think the fewer the better. Number 2, we need to pay every single penny every single month. This is the most important one of the 4. If you see a couple of months passing by and you're carrying a balance, it is time to get in front of a mirror and have one of those 12-step meetings with Steve. Hi, I'm Steve, and I'm a spendaholic. And you know what you do if you're an alcoholic, right? If you're an alcoholic, you don't want to be an alcoholic anymore. What do you have to quit doing? Drinking. Yeah, you got to quit drinking. And part of the strategy isn't just to keep 1 bottle of vodka on top of the fridge in case you have an emergency. You don't keep 1 credit card in case you have an emergency. You got to get rid of all those things. And number 2, we need to pre-plan how we'll use the card. If you're not married, do this on your own. If you are married, do it with your spouse. Can we use the card for this? Yes, nope, nope, nope. We can buy gas, we can do that, yes, yes. And come down to a short list of things that you could do with it. And then, brothers and sisters, keep your promise. Don't any of you wives ever go to the mall on Saturday and say, I don't care what I told him, I'm just going to go out and have fun. You can't do that. And guys, don't you ever come off with this line like, it's my money, I'm the man around here, I'll just do what I want. That is not Christian. That is not the way Jesus would speak. Now, when you made a promise to your spouse, to your love partner for the rest of your life, you keep that promise. I mean, I guess if you get somewhere where you just have to use a card for something that's not on the list, I don't know, call home. Honey, I'm in jail tonight, And there may be an exception here and there, but as a rule, we're going to keep our promise. And number 4, don't let these cards become a source of pride and showiness. I can still remember back to the 1970s when I got my first gold card. And I thought I was so cool. I thought I was like one of maybe 12 people in America that had one of these. And I couldn't wait for all my friends to see that I had a gold card. And I'm embarrassed to admit this, but it's so true. I can honestly remember taking friends and business clients out to lunch and feeding everybody so they could all see me flip out my gold card. Idiot. You don't get cards to show off with. You get them for 2 reasons: to pay bills and to keep records. And that is pretty much that, okay? So what about debit cards? You can't talk about credit cards without also talking about debit cards. Many people think that these are a great, sensible alternative, and they can be used and they can be very effective. But they are, in my judgment, a less than perfect solution. And I'll tell you, there's 3 reasons for that. After the credit card companies got into so much trouble 10 or a dozen years ago about their abusive credit card treatment, they, in some cases, began to change their credit card practices because the law was making them to, but they began to put more fees and gotchas into some of the debit card products. And also, you need to learn to look out for bounce checks. I mean, if you have a low balance checking account and you're out here writing checks or using your debit card, you can easily get over that amount that you have, and that's when the banks start hitting you with those, whatever they are, $38 per transaction charges for overdrafts. And those things add up in a hurry. The credit or the banking industry looks forward to making $20 to $30 billion a year on that one charge alone. You need to be aware of that. And also, another shortcoming of debit cards, they got the same problem credit cards do. They're made out of the wrong material. Plastic spending is just easier than cash spending. I mean, you kind of get this little wrist action thing going, kind of throwing it out, feels good. People that use credit cards frequently will spend up to 40% more than they would if they were using cash. So just avoid the urge to splurge, okay? Now, let's head down the road a little bit further here, because this is important stuff. I want to give you a 7-step do-it-yourself credit repair kit. This is for those of you who have had some problems in the past. You've finally gotten over them, but you're dealing with some of that debris that has a way of coming in sometimes for months or even years later. These are 7 things that might help you kind of right your boat if you're in that situation. Number 1, you need to develop that personal financial freedom plan that we talked so much about last night and stick with it. You've got to do this. This is the lumberjack that's going to get you out of the middle of the burning woods. You've got to do this. And if you can't do it by yourself, get somebody that knows what they're talking about to help you with this. But you need this written budget, because that is your pathway out of the pain. Number 2, if you simply can't do a budget, as I just said, get somebody to help you with it. Don't give up on this. Find somebody that knows what they're doing, maybe somebody even here at church, and get them to work through this with you. Number 3, be sure that your credit file is totally accurate. This means that you're going to contact the 3 big companies, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, and get your credit reports. The law has changed, and the law now allows us to get one free credit pull from each one of these companies each year. And a good place to go is annualcreditreport.com to get that. Get those 3 reports. I suggest getting them once about every 4 months instead of all 3 at once. That way you might have a little better chance of catching it if somebody's messing with your money through the year. But when you get those, review them and make sure that everything on those is accurate, that they got the right address, they got the right details. And if you see some debt on there that's wrong, you need to contact that bureau immediately. And what they have in most cases, the Fair Credit Reporting Act usually allows them 30 days to do one of 2 things: to either do what you want them to do and take it off your credit report, or go back to the creditor and let the creditor revalidate. Now, if the creditor revalidates, we're going to go to the next stage where, after we've, as I've just said, I should have had this up, after we've challenged the inaccurate information, if the creditor does want to put it back up, we're going to go to the 5th stage here, and that's when we're going to contact the creditor directly and ask them for their help and cooperation. Be as kind and as Christian as you know how to as you have this conversation. And remember that if by now you've paid off your past debts with these people, they may be very, very happy to work with you on this. And you might be surprised at how cooperative that they will be in taking this old stuff off of your record. Very good, very wise to ask them. Number 6, add positive histories to your credit report. If you see people, if you see your credit report and you've got people you're paying debts to that are not reporting, ask them to report. I ran into a guy a ways back. His mortgage company wasn't even reporting his payments. You need to make sure you get the good stuff on there. And lastly, as a warning, you need to add accuracy to the file. That means you need to make sure that every spelling on there is correct, your address is correct, phone numbers are correct. If you see a weird address or something on there, get excited. That could be the indication that somebody's out here messing around with your credit and you're going to be hearing about it. Pay close attention to this. Now that we've shared these 7, I want to talk to you about one of the other things. We live in a culture that says, hey, if you're in debt, no big deal. Just simply go out here and get a handy-dandy bill consolidation loan. And every one of us have had bill consolidation loans pitched to us as the solution to every kind of problem out there that has to do with money. I want us to be cautious with these. BCLs can be really, really bad. They look like you're playing with a beautiful candle, but they can end up being like, being in a room of dynamite. These things can literally blow us apart. I want to talk to you about how they work. I'm just tell you this, I don't even like bill consolidation loans because they don't really work for most people. Most people, though, don't listen to me on this. So if you want to get a BCL, let me at least give you a quick 2-step to-do list. Number one, determine to borrow as little money as possible. Here's what happens usually. A person will look at all their debts. They got, 3 car loans and 3 credit cards and school loans and furniture loans, and they got whatever, $75,000 of debt. And they come running over here to their bank or their consolidation loan company, and they say, I need $75,000. And the good old boy or gal that's in the chair leans back and says, hey, no problem. I'll be glad to write you that. But by the way, don't you think you have some things around the house that kind of need some remodeling? Why don't you just let me write this check, say, for about $90,000? And you're a debtaholic anyway, so you're looking at them going, yeah. And you go home that day 10 or 15,000 deeper in debt than you were when you came in the door. Don't do that kind of thing. Instead, we're going to borrow as little as we can, for as low as we can, for as short as we can. I may owe $75,000, but I look at my credit cards and I say, I don't owe more than $5,000 or $6,000 on any of those. If I would get really tough and follow that 3-point steroid plan that Steve was talking about, I could probably murder those in 3 or 4 years. But if I put them into my BCL, I'm going to be messing with these things for decades. So instead of including those, you might not include them. You might end up with, instead of $75,000, maybe only needing to borrow $40,000 or $45,000. Little as I can, for as short as I can, for as low as I can. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to really make sure that this loan helps my situation. That means that when the banker calls and says, hey, Steve, come on down here. I got your contract ready. I'm going to say, don't think so. I need for you to email that to me in a PDF form. That way nobody can monkey with what's on it. And I want to review that. And I am going to sit down and I'm going to read through that thing line by line. I'm going to make sure that the interest rates, the terms, excuse me, and everything about this is better than what I've got now, or I'm not going to do the deal. And listen, I would tell you one last thing. If you're a Christian, I would encourage you to think, before you sign the contract for this BCL, I would encourage you to think about reaching in your pocket and getting rid of all those credit cards. Why? Because this is the pathway back into the pain. And then get on your knees and tell God, I'm sorry. Dear God, I'm just sorry for all the things that I've done, the greed, the lack of trust in you that have gotten me where I'm at. And with your help, Father, I promise I'm not going to do this again. That's my suggestion, something to think about. Now, we're going to wrap this up, but in conclusion, I just want to remind you that 90% of life boils down, I think, to being on the right side of the line. My mother was the winningest person that I ever knew. As a kid, I can remember she'd win things from the radio station. She was always winning prizes. She'd go downtown we lived in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a town of about 30,000 people. She'd go downtown to the shopping center, and I promise you, every time she'd get there, somebody would pull out and give her the best parking place. It was crazy. But she called me one day. Now, she died in 2004, so she called me before she died. She called me one day. She said, Steve, guess what? I said, what, Mama? She said, I just won something. I said, did you really? She said, yes, I did. I said, tell me about it, Mama. She said, well, last Saturday, I go into the shoe store, and they had this box there. I put my name in it. I'm the grand prize winner. I said, what did you get, Mom? A pair of shoes? She says, no, this was a regional contest. I am the grand prize winner of an all-expense-paid trip for 2 to go out to Hollywood and go to the Emmy Awards. Go figure. Anyway, she said, Steve, I don't think I want to go. You think you and Bonnie would like to go instead? Ooh, I was so glad she was my mama that day. We headed to Beverly Hills faster than the Clampetts. If you're not old enough to know that joke, ask Ben Myers, okay? But I'm picking on Ben here. We had a great time with Ben and Robin this afternoon. They're just some of our best friends. But anyways, we headed out to California. We get out there, we had this Cadillac. We're driving around Los Angeles in this Cadillac, going to Bel Air, going to Beverly Hills. Came the night of the Emmy Awards. And I'm telling you, it's exactly like you see on TV. There's like this big red carpet that comes way up. And here's the road where all the limousines are coming. And over here on the other side of the road, there's like these barricades and police officers behind them. And behind the police officers, there were hundreds, maybe thousands of folks yelling and screaming and carrying on. But on this particular night, my babe and we got to get out on this side of the road. We got to walk up this red carpet. Hey, Oprah, how you doing today? Larry, are you and Dave getting along any better? Just having a big old time. Until about the time we stepped into the auditorium. For whatever reason, I can't tell you for sure what happened, but I turned around and I looked back. And I saw something I hadn't seen before. Way back here, behind the police officers, behind the crowds, there was a, I guess it was a big, long brick planter, maybe about 2 feet off the ground and probably 20 feet long. And lined up across it were a half a dozen or so very lonely people holding up a big, long banner that said something to the effect, Hollywood is breaking the heart of Jesus. And just like in a blink, we realized these are not our people. Those people over there are our people. I mean, we're going in on the high night of Hollywood to congratulate a lot of people that are making a lot of stuff that we don't need to be watching. Well, by this point, I mean, we were literally being pushed on in the door. What do? Somebody came up and they said, Steve, do you remember that you've been invited to the after party? I looked at Bonnie and I said, we'll be there. After the show went off the air, they took us into this room, and it wasn't much bigger than one of our classrooms around here. There must have been 300 of us packed in there like sardines. I mean, everybody you could think of on TV seemed like they were in that room at that moment. And that night, God gave Bonnie and me the courage. He gave us the opportunity, and He gave us the words. And we spent that evening getting on the right side of the line. We spent that evening talking to people, and you would know their names if I told you who these people were, talking to people about Jesus Christ and what the media could be like. And these weren't adversarial conversations. They were warm, hospitable. But we had at some point to determine whose kids we were, get on the right side of the line, and start doing it God's way. Christians, that's what everything in our lives is about. Are we on God's side of the line? Are we doing our lives, our money, our relations, our business affairs? Are we doing it God's way? And that's the question I think we all need to ask ourselves. Now listen, I'm going to tell you about something here real fast. I've got 2 things to tell you about. Then we're going to take a couple of minutes of a break, let everybody go to the bathrooms and get something to drink if you want to. And we'll come back in not more than about 5 minutes. And we'll conclude with our final session, which is, again, the shortest and my favorite on getting ahead. But I want to share a couple of things with you. Number one, as I've mentioned, I do a lot of professional speaking. If you own a business or are involved in a business that could use some of the kind of help that I provide, I do a lot of sales training, I do a lot of customer service training, and a lot of professional development. And if you'd like for me to come down and spend a day with your team and work with them, or if you've got a situation where you need a keynote of some type, I do a lot of teaching on resiliency. I do it for the United States Army and their Master Resiliency Program. I do a lot of this sort of thing. This is my website, stevediggs.com. I would just invite you, please, to feel free to shoot me a note. You can get to my email there. I'll put my email up here in a second. But you can shoot me an email or phone me, whatever you'd like to do. And let me pop real fast across here. You know something? I may have a mistake here. Let me see if I do or not. Let me see. Sorry, guys and girls. I was going to show you something else, and I don't know what I did with it. I thought it was right here. Well, let me just tell you about this. There are two online websites that are speaking bureaus. One of them is called The Bash. The other one is called Gig Salad. And at both of these, I have some of the highest ratings in the business. They have a 5-star rating system. I do understand that they need some more reviews from me for their algorithms or whatever's involved. And if you feel like you could give me a 5-star review, I would love to hear from you. Just send me an email if you would like to. My email address is stevefdiggs@gmail.com. Steve F, like the word Franklin, Diggs@gmail.com. It's not there. I thought it was. But just simply stevefdiggs@gmail.com. Give me your name and a phone number, and they will send you a little email and just ask you how many stars you can give. And if you can hit 5 stars, that'd be great. If you want to make a comment, you're welcome to. But that would make all the difference. So if you're interested, send me an email this evening, or you can just send it to me during the break here, stevefdiggs@gmail.com. I would really appreciate it. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to let some of these slides run. You might enjoy watching these for a few minutes. And in about 4 or 5 minutes, we'll be back with session number 4. Thank you.
The fifth of 5 children born to Harold and Willie Eva Burnett in Dallas, Texas, became passionate about his faith in God. His love for music would take Gerald to wonderful heights. He began his faith walk at the age of 9 when he was baptized into Christ at the Mountain View Church. His faith in God. He began his faith walk at the age of
Everything will be alright. Yes, everything will be alright. Just put your faith in Jesus Christ. Everything is gonna be alright. Be alright. Don't you know that everything will be alright? Don't you know that everything will be alright? Just put your faith in Jesus Christ. Everything is gonna be alright. Be alright. When you think you cannot stand, just hold on tight to my God's unchanging hand. He'll pick you up when you fall down. He will place your feet back on the ground. And without Jesus, you're all alone. You cannot make it on your own. All of your battles he will fight. Everything is gonna be alright. It's alright. It's alright. It's alright. With the Lord on my side, it's alright. It's alright. It's alright. It's alright. With the Lord on my side, everything will be alright. Don't you know that everything will be alright? Just put your faith in Jesus Christ. Don't you know that everything is gonna be alright? Be alright. Don't you know that everything will be alright? Don't you know that everything will be alright? Just put your faith in Jesus. Don't you know that everything will be alright? Be alright. It's alright. It's alright. Don't you know it's alright? With the Lord on my side, you know it's alright. It's alright. It's alright. With the Lord on my side, I know I can make it. Oh, I can make it. I can make it. Don't you know that I can make it? I can make it. Oh,
Sometimes in my life I have to go through trials and tribulation, and the things of this world seem to get me down. It seems like no one else goes through all that I do. What shall I do? What shall I do? Satan's after me, he wants to take my soul, to keep me ever lost so deep in sin. But I am determined to see Christ one day. What shall I do? What shall I do? What shall I do? What shall I do? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to thy understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct.
Welcome back. Listen, I'm glad to see everybody back. And I can't see you, but I can feel you. I know you're out there. And tonight we're going to wrap this No Debt, No Sweat seminar here at Greenville Avenue up, I hope with a real bang, because this is the session where I want to talk to you about how to get ahead God's way. And it all really begins with learning to follow the lead of successful people. I want to talk to you about investing tonight. But I need to explain a few things before we get into this, because this is very important, because everybody and his brother these days is giving investment advice. And about 95% of it is probably not particularly good advice. We need to understand something about investment, because the trouble is we tend to go and get our investing advice from all the wrong places. A lot of us get our investing advice from that big panel thing in our living room called the television. Yeah, that's right. And that's where we go and we watch this guy, is on TV blowing his horns and bumpers and carrying on. This, in my judgment, is not the way investing gets done. I'm simply going to tell you something here that is the truth that a lot of people don't know, they don't understand. But most of these people who claim to know what the market is going to do, in fact, don't. The studies have been done, the data is in. If you take any group of these high-powered money managers, all of whom claim to be able to tell you where the market is going to go, you take any group, say, of 100 of those people, and you track them over an extended period of time, say 20 years, the studies indicate that in most cases, well under 10% of those, usually about 4 to 7% of them, are actually right in what they do. But the trouble is we don't know 20 years earlier which 4 to 5 or 6% of the people are going to do it right. So we're stuck with this problem. How do I get good investment advice? Well, I'm not going to get complicated here, but I will tell you that one of the things that I tend to lean into is known as modern portfolio theory. Modern portfolio theory, sometimes called MPT, was founded at the University of Chicago back in the 1950s. This is a 2-time Nobel Prize-winning study in economics. And part of what NPT tells us is just what I told you, that nobody is smart enough to predictably outguess markets over long, extended periods of time. At least we don't know who can do it in advance. That's what we've learned over the years. So how do we invest money? And how do we get a guaranteed safe return? First off, there are no guarantees in life. There's no guarantee that we're going to get through this night. There's no guarantee that our money's going to grow like we want it to. There's no guarantee that our children will turn out the way we hope. There's no guarantee that we're not going to get sick. But there are some things we can do to give ourselves the very best shot at it. And I want to share this evening 6 of the traits that great investors tend to lean into. Some investors use all of these and others, some use part of these and others, but these are 6 that have pretty well weathered the test of time. Now, if I do what you're saying here, Steve, am I going to make a lot of money? The answer is, I don't know. You may not. You may lose money. Anything could happen. And I need to remind you that I am not a registered investment advisor. I am simply an individual who's had a lot of experience doing this on my own, talked to a lot of people over these decades, and I share from that side of the fence. But the first thing that wise individuals do is that they start early. They say that today's greatest work-saving device is tomorrow. Well, it may be for some things, but I can guarantee you that it is not for the money. We need to learn to start getting things going earlier on than we tend to do. Solomon talked about this very thing in the Proverbs. And by the way, while I'm saying this, would somebody mind to bring me one of your red workbooks just for a minute? I'm going to need to look at that, and I failed to bring one up here. Thank you, brother. I'll hand it back to you in just a half a second if you want to wait here when I'm done. Thank you so much. But as Solomon said in the Proverbs, he said, go to the ant, O sluggard, observe her ways, be wise. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and boom, your poverty will come like a vagabond. Your need will come like an armed man. So my point is simply this. We need to be people who pre-act, like I said yesterday, so we're not spending our lives having to react to everything that comes around. The best time to start an investment program would have been yesterday. If you didn't start yesterday, the next best time will be tomorrow morning at about 8 o'clock. The sooner the better. Now, if you'll take your workbooks and turn over here to the next page, and let me get this open for my own use here. This is over on page 16. You're going to see a chart. And this is a chart to give us some idea what it looks like when we start early versus starting later. This is not any kind of a guarantee return whatsoever. This is simply for comparative purposes. But we have here 4 hypothetical couples. The first couple are my heroes. This is Jack and Judy Jumpstart. Jack and Judy both got married when they were 20. They fell in love with each other, but they did not fall in love with stuff. And they said, we want to have some dignity in our retirement. Wonder what we would need to do to retire, say, with $1 million. They ran the numbers, and they made up their minds that for the next 8 years, every single year, they were going to set aside $2,000, as you can see in your chart here. Now, at that point, they stopped setting aside money. I wish they hadn't done that, but they stopped setting aside money. But what will that $16,000 eventually grow to by the time they retire at age 66? Well, based on these assumptions that may or may not hold, they will end up with over $1 million, $1,035,000, as you can see here. Well, Jack and Judy have a couple of friends by the name of Larry and Lisa Loafer. Larry and Lisa, they both got married when they were 20 also, but they went through their 20s and up to all the way through their 20s, just having a big old time. They went on the cruises, they bought the his and her cars, but here they are at age 30, cranked up over the backyard fence, looking next door at Jack and Judy laying there in a hammock, kissing and necking and nuzzling on each other because they don't have anything to worry about. And Larry and Lisa say, wonder what we would have to do to have the same $1 million that Jack and Judy are going to get. We're only starting 10 years later at age 30. Well, if you'll take a look over here at your sheet, you'll see that what they're going to have to do is radically different. Not for the next 6 years, but for the next 37 years, every single year, Larry and Lisa Loafer are going to have to set aside $2,800. That's over $100,000 to get the same $1 million that Jack and Judy got with their $16,000. Well, our next poor couple, this is Ollie and Odette Oh No. They're both 40. They don't have 2 nickels to rub together. What are they going to have to do? For the next 27 years, starting at age 40, they're going to have to start setting aside $7,600 every year. That's more than $200,000 a year to get the same $1 million that Larry and Lisa got for their $16,000. Well, our last poor couple, this is Herb and Helen Hurry Up. I'm going to walk over here and hand the book to the brother as I tell you that at age 50, they started setting aside money, but thank you, brother, they're going to have to set aside $23,000 every single year, if you can imagine that, for 17 years. That's almost $400,000 to get the same $1 million that Jack and Judy got with their $16,000. Listen, I hope point here is clear. There's not just additional benefit to starting early, there is geometrical benefit. It is so important that we understand this concept. And I know that if you're 70 years old, it's too late to start early. I get that. But I've known people in their 70s that have started investment programs and seen really important results. But the younger we are, the better. And this, again, moms and dads, grandparents, is why we need to start talking to our young people and getting them educated and motivated and animated when it comes to dealing with their money. Here's the second concept that many wise investors use. They understand the concept of compounding. I call compounding the great investment steroid. When old fuzzy-haired Albert Einstein first heard about compounding, he called it the eighth wonder of the world. It blew his fuzzy little brain. He could not believe how well this thing worked. Let me tell you what it is. And I'm going to tell you based on the way my father taught me. Back when I was a kid, I don't know, 10, 12 years old maybe, one night we were sitting across the dinner table from each other. And my dad looked at me and he said, "Steve, pretend that I have a job I need you to do. It's going to take 30 days. And pretend that I'm prepared to pay you in either of two ways that you would prefer. If you wish, I'll give you $1,000 every day for 30 days, $30,000 to do this. Or if you prefer, I'll give you 1 penny on the first day. And the next day I'll give you 2 pennies and 4 pennies and 8 pennies, like that." He said, "Which way would you prefer to be paid?" Well, you know, me being the 12-year-old rocket scientist that I was, I don't really remember, but I suspect I took Dad up on that $30,000 deal. Does everybody here realize that that would have been the mistake of a lifetime? By the way, does anybody here know what 1 penny doubled just 30 times would be worth? That would be worth over $5 million, about $5,020,000. Now, if I've got your attention, this is what compounding boils down to. Compounding allows an investment to grow faster by generating earnings on top of reinvested earnings. You take the interest that you earn on your investment and reinvest it in the same investment for the opportunity to earn more money. In other words, as your investment maybe gains interest or maybe capital gains or dividends, you don't take those out. You just throw them back in and let it keep growing on top of itself. For instance, here's how it would work. Suppose that somebody was offering you, and this would not probably happen because this is unusually high, but just to give you an example. Suppose somebody was offering to pay you a 10% guaranteed return on an investment of $35,000 over 30 years. Now the question is, how much would that money be worth, your $10,000, in 35 years? Well, if you just do it without compounding, it's pretty simple. What is 10% of $10,000? Yeah, $1,000. So every year for 35 years, we get $1,000. And that's $35,000. And in year 35, we throw back in the original $10,000 principal. And in 35 years, we have a pretty tidy $45,000. But what do you suppose would happen with that same $10,000 for that same 35 years at that same 10% interest? Supposing we compounded it, say, about every month. That means that every month, whatever dimes or dollars that it's earned, we just throw them back into the pile. If you did that, instead of $45,000, you would retire with probably right at $320,000. Now, again, Christians, this is why we have to ask questions. When you open up a CD at the bank, does this thing compound? If they say no, well, you might go somewhere else. Or if they say, well, every year, that isn't really compounding. But if they say, yes, it compounds every quarter or every month or whatever, then great. That is going to give you better returns on the dollar. So you understand this. And the same thing is true with your mutual funds. You know, the mutual fund company sometimes will say, do you want us to send you the capital gains and the interest that you earn? If you're not going to need that money for a while, now there are no guarantees of this, but generally speaking, if you're not going to need that money for a long while, it's probably wise to think about leaving it in there and letting it grow on top of itself. Very, very important concept. Third concept that wise investors deep dive into is this concept of dollar cost averaging. Now, DCA is one of the most widely used and popular investment techniques out there. Different people define DCA differently. I'm going to just kind of give you my definition as we go through this. I like dollar cost averaging because it kind of limits a little bit of the ups and downs in the market, because what I determined to do, instead of trying to time the market, and by the way, that's what so many investment advisors want you to do, and most of them will tell you that they don't, but they are. They're saying, well, this is probably a good time to get into this or a good time to get out of that. That is market timing. I'm just simply telling you. And people that do a lot of market timing generally do not have as good a results as people who buy and hold. But here's the way, instead of dollar cost averaging means that instead of me running around here trying to time the market and get in at the right moment and get out at the right moment, instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a solid investment. Maybe this is in my 401k at work. And I'm going to put together a solid plan with certain mutual funds and whatever in there. And every month I'm going to put the same number of dollars in. I don't care what is going on, the same number of dollars going in. So let's just pretend that I'm going to put in $200 a month, okay? And the first month I put the money in, the shares in the mutual funds are, say, selling for $40 a share. I put in $200. How many shares do I get? Yeah, I get 5 shares that month. Great. But the next month, the markets have gone way down, and those same shares are selling for $10 a share. I don't get spooked. I know it's a good, solid investment. I put my $200 in, and I get for $200 at $20 a share. Is that what I said it went down to? $20 or $10? I think $10 a share. That means I'm going to get 20 shares this month for the same number of dollars. That's dollar cost averaging. It's a little bit like going down here to Kroger when we're done and looking for bargains. I mean, you go down to Kroger tonight, you go in the store, and you want to buy some Del Monte green beans in a can. I don't know what they sell for, but let's suppose they're usually $1 a can. You walk in tonight and they're 2 cans for $1. That's what we would call a bargain, right? But now we walk over, and that makes some sense. But it doesn't always work that way. I'm not suggesting that we just buy everything that we see that's cheap. I mean, we could walk over to the meat counter here in Kroger, and they might have T-bone steaks that normally sell for whatever, $10 a pound. Tonight they're on sale for $2 a pound. Well, now that could be a great deal. But if those suckers are turning green, that ain't no deal. I'm not saying that with dollar cost averaging, we just buy everything that we see that's cheap. But I am saying that we get a solid investment and we stay consistent with it. I'm not telling you have to do this, but people who do this, many cases, come out better than the people that are always jumping in and jumping out of the market. Here's the 4th concept that is so important to understand, arguably the most important of the 6, and this is asset allocation. Asset allocation is a first cousin to diversification. It all boils down to understanding that it is terribly dangerous to put all of our nest eggs into one basket. The experts, and I'm not talking about the talking heads on TV. I'm talking about the real academics that have done this for a living and know what they're saying. They tell us that over 90% of long-term returns in the market are going to come not by when we get in and get out or timing the market, but instead they come from how we allocate our money. For instance, and this is not a recommendation, it's just an example, but suppose you have money that you want to invest. You might think about, say, putting some of it into a mutual fund that buys large cap American companies like the Fortune 500, the 500 biggest companies in America. You might put some money into a small cap American company that buys small companies, maybe some into some foreign mutual funds, maybe into some bond funds, whatever. Now, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to have the highest rate of return, but what happens is these different types of assets respond differently at the same time. For instance, when one is up, others will tend to be going down. And that way, if one of your investments is going up, even though some may be going down, that one's going up, one day it'll be going down, and those others will be going up. So instead of this kind of a ride, you're getting something more like this. I love asset allocation for that reason. Now, again, I wish I were smart enough to come into an audience like this and offer to tell anybody in here how to allocate your money. I'm not smart enough to do that. I know more about this than probably 96 or 8% of the people in the businesses that do it. But I am not smart enough to do that. I need help doing it. But I would tell you this. Some of the things that may play into your consideration might include things like your age, your health, your family status, some of these things that I have up beside me. Arguably, the most important one for some people will be that top one, our age. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Suppose you want to invest money in this, you want to invest some of your money. And just to keep this very simple, let's suppose we're going to put it into 4 different categories. We're going to put some money into, and let me just explain this first. I want to give you 4 numbers. Stocks have had an average annual return over the decades of probably 10, 11, 12%. Bonds have probably had an average return over the decades of around 5%. Cash has had an average annual return probably of just under 4%. So you hear all of this, and you say, well, yippee skippy, I'm going to put all my money over here in stocks. Well, that might be okay, but then again, it may not be okay. Because remember, even though stocks tend to have higher long-term returns, they also have bigger highs and lows. And if you happen to have all of your money over here in the stock market at the age of retirement, and the market's gone way down, you might be pulling your money out 60 or 70 cents on the dollar. You don't want to do that. So you probably would want to have some money over here in some bonds that are going to tend to be a little bit more like this, maybe a little bit in cash. Now, people sometimes hear all this and they say, Steve, wait a minute. If you're telling me it's so risky in stocks, for instance, I'm just going to put all my money in cash. You think that isn't high risk? That's high risk. Just play the game with me. Think about this for a minute. Suppose you go down to your bank today and you put $1,000 into a mutual fund. And let's just pretend that they are paying 4%. I don't know anybody in the country who's paying anything close to that now. But let's just pretend they are. They're paying 4%. Now you come back a year later and you say, hey, I need my money. And they write you a check for $1,040. You've made a guaranteed safe return of what? 4%, right? Maybe not. You see, I told you I was going to give you 4 numbers, that stocks have returned around 10 or 12%, something in that range. Bonds around 5-ish. Cash, mutual funds, things of this sort, maybe around 4, a little under. The number I did not give you is the rate that inflation has run at for all these years. Inflation has run at probably 3 to 4% all these years. So let's pretend that we've earned this 4% interest, these $40, but let's pretend that we're in say a 3% inflationary spiral. Well, then suddenly we're losing a lot of money, aren't we? Our money's only worth about $3, or $30, I should say. You see, inflation can eat us alive. It can mess us up badly. So probably the right advice for some people is to simply say, we need a good diversification. And as we get closer to the retirement years, we may want to think about taking maybe some of this money in equities, stocks, away from them and put them into bonds and cash, something more stable. But even in retirement these days, since people are living so long, it probably makes sense to leave some of our money over here in equities and stocks so that you have that potential for greater growth. Now, again, I can't make any kind of guarantee on this, but I will tell you that this is considered to be a generally sound approach to investing and allocating our assets. A 5th key that the really wise investors lean into is that they keep their eye on the money ball. Successful investors just have a 6th sense. They pay attention to the money. And listen to me on this. This is very careful. Nobody else is going to be as interested as you should be in your own money. I don't care how smart they are. You need to be watching what your money is doing all the time. This is so important, something a lot of people just don't do. And a lot of them live to regret it. It doesn't have to be complicated. Some of the best investors I know could rip off a half a sheet of paper and grab a crayon and tell a 10-year-old where the money is. But you do need to watch the money. And number 6, we need to stay away from these nutty investment schemes that come right and left. There's nothing new under the sun. You know, back in the 1960s, nothing. Back in the 1600s, some of you may have read in your history books about the tulip bulb mania. It started in the Dutchlands, and by the time it had spread throughout Europe, people were literally exchanging farms and homes for single tulip bulbs, if you can believe that. Yeah, and like everything else, that thing imploded and people all over the continent lost everything. And you say, well, I'm sure glad people aren't like that anymore. Shoot, we're going to have, and we still to this day, we have day traders, market timers, riverboat gamblers on every corner. But sooner or later, it almost always happens. The end comes badly, the bottom falls out, and what comes after that is a big, bad, bone-crushing experience. So we need to ask the musical question. What is the average boy or girl supposed to do? Well, one of the things that I like to talk about are mutual funds. These are right for a lot of people. And again, they may or may not be right for you. I'm not trying to promote them. I'm trying to simply add some information to your existing body of information on mutual funds. I will also tell you that I do not sell mutual funds. I would not feel morally right coming to a church, teaching on them, and then sitting down in the back corner saying, hey, I can sell you mutual funds. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm simply trying to share some things that might be helpful to your considerations going forward. You need to understand a little bit about mutual funds. These things have been around in the United States at least since the 1920s. We have well over 15,000 mutual funds these days. Maybe a few hundred are worth looking at. Upwards of 100 million Americans have money in mutual funds. A lot of it is in their retirement programs. About half of all 401k and IRA money right now is invested in mutual funds, and this is a big industry. It's now, here it says 28 trillion, but it's grown a little bit since then. It's now over a $30 trillion a year business. This is huge money and great things that we can do if we understand how to use these. Now, there are all sorts of mutual funds out there. They have different purposes. They've got different personalities. They invest in all kinds of assets. Most of them invest in either stocks, bonds, or cash. But there are some oddball things out there that invest in art, real estate, all kinds of things. And then we also need to understand that the expenses and the performances of mutual funds also vary widely. So when I'm teaching mutual funds, I always like to tell people about my two-point mutual fund analogy. I like to remind folks two things that we need to remember. Number one, I like to compare mutual funds to sushi. I don't know if you like sushi, but I like sushi. I learned, though, a long time ago when I get a plate of, wherever the slide is, I guess it's over, is the slide over here in this direction? Am I pointing at? Good. Over here, when you get a plate of sushi that looks like this one right here, it looks great. And on that plate of sushi, kind of over at the far end there, you see that kind of white, pink stuff. That is ginger. It's a palate cleanser, kind of sweet, tastes real good. But that little green, pasty blob of stuff at the end, what's that called? Does anybody know? Wasabi, yeah. Wasabi is made from a high-octane oriental radish. And folks, I'm telling you, this is some of the hottest stuff on the planet. You eat this the wrong way, and kaboomski, that's going to throw you back into about last Tuesday. That's hot stuff. But I learned a long time ago, if I was going to enjoy sushi, I'd better understand the sushi language so I didn't eat the wrong thing at the wrong time. Well, folks, it's exactly the same way with mutual funds. We've got to understand some of the mutual fund language. And I'm going to be talking to you about that here in a moment. The second thing that I like to compare mutual funds to are motorcycles. The differences in motorcycles is what makes them interesting, fun, and potentially deadly. I love motorcycles. I always have. Let me just show you this. This is my motorcycle right here. It's a Harley-Davidson Evo engine, fuel-injected, black on black. I mean, this is a mean bike. I love this. Now, I know what you're doing. You're sitting at home right now. Now, some of you are ready to get on the road with me. I know that. Some of you have had bikes. But a lot of you are sitting at home right now looking at me thinking, yeah, I know what a motorcycle is. It's two wheels with a nut on top. Well, whatever you think about motorcycles, here's what I've learned. I've learned that those people who like motorcycles can tell the differences between them without even looking at them. I can turn my back and listen to my bike against another bike, and I can tell you whose is whose. And that's the way you are too if you ride bikes. We need to be able to do the same thing with mutual funds. We need to pay attention to the differences between them if we're going to invest in them. By the way, you've all heard of the Terminator? They call me the Serminator. That's a whole other thing. Let me keep going here. What is a mutual fund? Let me just talk to you about this. A mutual fund is nothing more than a fund that pools your money with the money of a lot of other folks called shareholders and invests that money in various securities, usually stocks, bonds, cash, in the hope of achieving a specified goal. That's to make more money. Each investor or shareholder who owns shares participates in the fund's gains or losses. It's that simple. I could take a basket around the room right now and ask everybody to put in a dime or a dollar, and we would then have a mutual fund. That's all there is conceptually to a mutual fund. Now again, instead of a couple of bucks, I would have millions or billions of dollars in a real one. And I would have had to give each one of my investors a prospectus that would have explained what we're going to invest in. Like, let's say this one's going to invest in large American companies. It would have had to tell you about past returns, expenses, all kinds of stuff. But this is how mutual funds work. Now, the four most popular categories of mutual funds, as I've already said, are stock funds first. And again, we have all kinds of stock funds. domestic stock funds, foreign stock funds, little company stock funds, big company, middle-sized company stock funds, all kinds of stock funds. We also have bond funds, all kinds of bond funds, government bond funds, foreign bond funds, state bond funds, corporate bond funds, everything you can imagine. Then there are the money market funds. Money markets are different from the others in the sense that these are designed never to lose principal. If you put $1,000 in, they should never go below $1,000. They grow very, very slowly, a little bit like a passbook savings account. But people generally think of these as fairly secure money. And the fourth category we're not even going to talk about are hybrid funds. These are some of the offbeat funds that most of us probably don't even care about learning a lot about. But the benefits of mutual funds, I think, are fairly broad. The only one I want to zero in on here is that top one, diversification. One of the things about mutual funds that I think make them very interesting is that they allow small investors like you and me to get some of the benefits that used to only be available to the very big investors. You see, even if if you had $1 million or $5 million, I would probably tell you that you're still not holding enough money to be going out here and buying individual stocks from individual companies. Why? Well, it's hard even with $1 million to buy enough shares each of enough different companies to get that broad market diversification that you want. But with a mutual fund, you could put a few $1,000s in there and in some cases be divided up into hundreds, maybe even thousands of different mutual fund of different companies. This is how you get that broad diversification. So when one company's doing well and another one's not doing so well, you get that more leveled path that we were talking about a little bit a while ago. Now, the two basic types of mutual funds based on how we pay for them are these. The first category are the loaded mutual funds. These are funds that in order to get into them, you have to buy them from an advisor in most cases. It's usually somebody at the bank or a brokerage house that's going to be trying to sell you these things, and they have to get paid. The load is their commission. The loads vary. I've seen them as low as 2%. I've seen them up over 5%. But a loaded fund means that you're going to have money going out at the front end or at the back end or somewhere in between to pay the person that is advising you. And that's just something you have to allow for. The other kind of fund are the no-load funds, which do not have loads. A lot of mutual fund companies sell no-loaded funds. One of the most famous that sells a lot of no-load funds, and I'm not promoting them, I'm just giving you their name, is Vanguard. Suppose you want to buy a Vanguard no-load fund. You just go online, you put your money in, and suddenly that money is in there, diversified for you, and into the funds that you send it into, and there's no load. It reduces some of your front end or overall expenses. Just something to be aware of. If you need help, get help. But at the same point, if you feel like you can do it without the advice, you can save some money. Now, so the question always is asked, well, which is best? And this thing's been debated for years. But I will tell you, as I just said, it depends on what type of person you are. If you need help, get help. But you don't necessarily have to get your help from somebody that's being remunerated with a commission, like with a loaded fund. Some people feel like that puts kind of a bad incentive on people to sell stuff that maybe you don't need. So if you feel that way, get somebody to help you and pay them by the hour. Or get them, and what I do is I have an advisor who works with me, and he takes a small sliver of my overall account every year. If I do well, he does better, and if I don't, he doesn't. And that has worked very well for us. But the point is, if you need help, get help. And then decide whether you want to buy loaded or not non-loaded funds. But just be aware that there are some expense differences in the load themselves. Now, the mutual funds themselves have their own loads. Over and above the load, I should strike that. The mutual funds, I should have said, have their own expenses. The loads are only one of those expenses that some funds have. All funds, to my knowledge, have management fees. Well, what is that, Steve? The management fee is the money that they're going to siphon out of your account every year to pay the kids that answer the phones and do those cool brochures and run the fund, okay? How much is the management fee on a mutual fund? I've seen management fees of under 0.1%. I've seen management fees over 3%. They're all over the board. But you just need to understand that these management fees can add up. And don't let somebody crank back in their chair and say, hey, what's the big deal? It's only 0.5% more than the other guys. Well, listen, if it doesn't matter to him, let him pay it. Because that 0.5% can cost you thousands of dollars over the years. Always compare competitive funds to one another and look at their cost, because that makes a difference. That's just something that we need to remember. Just compare those costs. I do not want to talk about all the various kinds of mutual funds because we don't have time. But I am going to make one exception. I do want to say a quick word about indexed mutual funds. Now, some of you have heard of these, and many of you probably are already using them. I want to tell you what they are. Back in the 1970s, some real smart people started looking at the mutual fund business, and they saw that what I told you earlier was absolutely the truth. They had all these big braggadocious funds out here saying, hey, we can beat the markets, we can do this and that. But in truth, many of them really weren't doing it. They had mutual fund managers that were trying to outguess the market and buy it low and sell high and all this carrying on, and they weren't pulling the thing off a lot of the time. So somebody said, well, the bad side of those is not that they only can not do well, but then those managers are still charging these exorbitant fees for their management help. So some people began to talk, and they thought, well, why don't we develop some very simple mutual funds that don't do anything more than buy the stocks that are in any one of the 10 or 20 major given indices that we hear about out here. You've all heard of the Fortune 500. That is the 500 or so biggest companies in America. Today we have index mutual funds tied to a lot of these indexes. So tomorrow, if I wanted to buy into the S&P 500 index fund that, say, Vanguard has, all I would have to do is go online, put my money in, and put my money into that mutual fund. Now, here's the curious thing. There is no manager in an index fund. They don't need a manager. It's all computer controlled. The moment that I put money in, it gets split up over those 500 companies, and it goes right in. And you know something? The interesting thing is that in many cases, not always, but in many, if not most of the cases, these index funds outperform the managed funds, because if they don't make better guesses, at least you're not paying that big management fee. You need to look into index funds and give them some thought, because they might be right in your situation. Now, as we're wrapping this up this evening, I want to warn a little bit about the dangers of chasing performance. And, you know, I've seen a lot of this over these last several years, especially since the crash in 2008. Because after that, what happened, so many people in my age group, younger, a little older, they saw the markets going way down, 40% or whatever, and they got spooked. And after the markets had gone down, they sold out and they put their money in cash. And they sat on the sidelines while the markets not only recovered, but have shot way, way, way past where they ever were before. And these people have gotten in after losing a lot of money. They sold low, they bought high. And a lot of these people now are spooked. They're thinking, man, I'm going into retirement. What am I going to do? Sadly, some of these people have taken some pretty dangerous risk that can really hurt them if they go wrong. So I need to remind you that when you buy a mutual fund, you need to read the fine print. One of the things all mutual funds are supposed to say is that past performance does not guarantee future returns. And you need to remember that, because that's so important. Frequently, mutual funds that have done the best in the past do the very poorest, or not as well at least, going forward. There is no guarantee that the past is going to be replicated in the future. And number two, look out for funds that are these big braggadocious funds. Hey, we've had a 74% rate of return. Well, maybe they did, but I mean, maybe it was just for a few days, a short period. I mean, look out for those, because the odds are high that in order to get those big returns, the management is taking some huge risk that could go south in a New York minute, and everybody could be hurting. I mean, think about it. Suppose I put $10,000 into one of these big high-flying accounts, or mutual funds. And then let's suppose that this year that thing shoots straight to the moon and it's up 100%. Into the year, I'm at $20,000 and I'm feeling fine, thank you. But next year, let's suppose that thing falls down, say 60%. And you're thinking, well, Steve, that's not too bad. I mean, shoot, you're still up, what, 40% for the year? Am I? Let's see, I put in $10,000, it goes up to $20,000 with 100% gain, and now I lose 60% of that? By my count, that's bringing me out down here at about $8,000. Look out for these big braggadocious funds. They can really hurt you if they go south. Christians, what I need to remind you of as we wrap the last of this up is that Satan himself has his own investment plan. By the way, my wife doesn't use the word Satan. She doesn't use the word devil. Her word for Beelzebub is the loser. He is the loser. He is going to lose in the end. We all know that. But in the meantime, he can cause us a lot of damage if we listen to him. I want to warn you about this. Satan's entire investment approach is centered around greed. And we need to remember that greed kills. It kills temporally and it kills eternally. That's an important thing to remember. Down here in the South, you've all said this. I say it. Pigs get fat and the hogs get slaughtered. The bigger pig you are, the more dangerous you are, because the greedier you are and the more likely you are to get hurt. Satan, really, when you think about it, doesn't have anything to work with, does he? I mean, these are not trick questions, just real fast. 3 questions. Number 1, who made this world, folks? God. And who made all the stuff in this world? God. And does God make good stuff or bad stuff? Good stuff. Okay, great. So if God made this world, and if God made all the stuff in this world, and if all the stuff God made is good, then what has the devil got to work with? You see, really all the devil has is this good stuff that God's made. But the devil's job is to take that and twist it, just pervert it a little bit, and then try to sell it back to us. Sex is a party in marriage. You take it outside of marriage, it's damnable. It's fornication. What we've been doing here in this room for these last 2 days, and again, thank you so much for your time. But in these last 2 days, we've been talking about our money. And if we do that in the right heart, that's a good thing about how to grow our money, how to share our money, all those things. But if we let this interest in our money just kind of morph a little bit, that's when we can get into trouble. The Bible warns about this. Solomon says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money. Timothy, or not Timothy, but Paul says to Timothy, love of money, it's the root of all sorts of evil. Some people, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith. They've pierced themselves with many grief. Wow. And Paul also says, set your minds, Christians, listen carefully, set your minds on the things above, not on the things of this earth. Why is that? It's because we've died and our lives are now hidden in Christ. That's where our economy really needs to be. So as we walk out the door here, I want to leave you with a challenge. I want to tell you to go out there and win. Now again, I know that this sounds like something that some cheesy motivational speaker would be saying on a Saturday afternoon. That's not the kind of winning I'm talking about. I want to redefine winning. For me, winning means that we pass the final exam. That's what I mean by it. Now, I don't pretend to know what God's throne room is going to look like. But I've got a feeling that on that last day, God is essentially going to be asking me 2 questions. Steve, who did you love? Steve, who loved you back? And that's going to be that. And before you call me a heretic, think about what I just said. Who did I love and who loved me back? Now, if I'm going to get these answers correct, I think I have to develop a couple of skill sets. Number 1, I need to develop head knowledge. I have to be a constant learner. I am so pleased with this plan that John and all of you have gotten together for this year, the routine Bible reading, the studying that you're doing. We need to do that. You know, we really need to be students of the Bible. But you got to remember also that for about 1,700 years of Christianity, virtually none of the Christians ever even saw a Bible. And among those who did, most of them couldn't read it. So how did this faith of ours hang together? That's number 2. We became people of the heart. You can read the Bible all day long, but if you don't become a person of the heart, where you're completely given over to other folk, and you're understanding their needs, and you're touching their hearts where they are, you're never going to quite win. You know, sometimes people say to me, they say, Steve, why are you talking about touching people's hearts? Why aren't we just talking about the head? Well, the reason is because Jesus didn't do it that way. You think about it, very rarely did Jesus quote Old Testament scripture, head stuff. Most of the time when something came up, what did he do? He told a what? A parable, a story that touched people's hearts. Now, he didn't stop there. Once he's touched their hearts, then it goes northward to their heads. So it's important that we Christians are people of the heart. And on that front, let me just say this. And maybe the best way I can illustrate it is this. I didn't see McDonald's TV commercial this past Christmas, but I'll tell you something. McDonald's is a company that knows how to play to people's hearts. And sadly, they're doing it just for the money. We Christians need to be doing it to touch people in important ways. I didn't see their TV commercial at Christmas, but something that would not be unusual for McDonald's might open up. Before I even say that, I'll say this. I've never seen a McDonald's TV commercial where some guy shows up talking to our head. You know, some guy in a white lab jacket holding up a burger says, "Hi, I work for McDonald's. We sell hamburgers. They taste good. Never mind the triple bypass. They taste good. We wish you would buy more." I mean, have you ever seen that TV commercial? No, and you're not going to. McDonald's knows that to reach people, they've got to touch our hearts. A typical commercial, maybe at Christmas from McDonald's, could open up like in a living room. And there's a big crackling fireplace right here, and over here there's this beautifully decorated Christmas tree. And over here on this other side, here's this big green overstuffed chair. And between the big green overstuffed chair and the fireplace, here's a little round table. And right here in front of this little round table is Jason. Jason's about 4 years old, and Jason's putting out cookies. About that time, Big Brother comes dribbling his ball through the living room, looks over his shoulder and says, "Jason, what are you doing?" Jason looks up and says, "Oh, they're cookies. They're for Santa Claus. He's coming tonight, you know." Big Brother looks at Jason and says, "Jason, you're crazy. There ain't no such thing as Santa Claus." And with that, he dribbles his ball out of the living room. And he leaves behind this crushed little shell of a brother. No Santa Claus. Next scene, middle of the night. Everybody in the house is totally asleep. It's all dark. Everybody's asleep except for Jason. Jason is upstairs in his bedroom, covers to his chin, holding his blanket and his teddy bear, and he's crying. No Santa Claus? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to check. And if those cookies are gone, that proves there's got to be a Santa Claus. And so with that, Jason gets out of bed with his blanket and his teddy bear. He comes down that dark hallway and down the steps into the dark living room. Now he can see his way because the fireplace is still crackling over there. And as Jason walks across the floor, he gets up to that big green overstuffed chair and his little tiny feet glue to the floor. He gets up his courage and he walks around to the other side and he looks down at his little round table. And his cookies are both still there. His brother's right. There's no Santa Claus. So Jason turns to go back to bed. But just as his foot hits that first step, this big white gloved hand drops down on Jason's little shoulders, and Jason looks up and the voice from the hand says, "Jason, I'm sorry I'm late, but I always love your cookies. Merry Christmas." And the signature comes up, "Merry Christmas from your friends at McDonald's." Now, which one of those two do you relate to? The guy with the burger or Jason? You see, Christians, we're people of the heart. And when we fall in love with our heart, we're going to be able to reach people in our communities like we never dreamed possible before. Again, I'm going to invite you, this is absolutely the last part of this, but in the last session, I made kind of an appeal to you to please feel free, if you'd like to help me out with a 5-star review, if you feel like you can do that here. I will have one sent to you if you'll just let me know. Just send me an email at stevefdiggs@gmail.com. Steve F, like the word Franklin, stevefdiggs@gmail.com. Send it to me along with your name and your phone number, and I will have one of two companies, either Bash or Gig Salad. Those are the two companies. Send you a little form. They'll ask you to hit 5 stars, and if you want to make a comment, you can. And I don't know, maybe a couple of other things in there, and just send it back to them. That would be a big, big help. Also, if I could ever serve any of you in any way, that's my website. Don't be shy about calling me. It has been so fun being here at Greenville Avenue. I love this church. Bonnie and I were talking at lunch. If we lived down here, if you'd have us, I think we'd be full-time, full-bore members. We just love you guys to death. Thank you so much. God bless you. Goodbye. Thank you.
To Brother Diggs for coming and being with us. He has done a phenomenal job. We just appreciate him so very much for making this material so very practical. We've already talked to our kids about becoming RAs at their school. We're rejuvenated about doing our personal financial freedom plans. And we're just hopeful that you who are streaming with us will also be so inspired to do what you can to be fiscally responsible as we go into this quarter of Ready, Set, Grow. These are some areas in which we can grow in, as well as in our Bible study. And so we're just so elated to have been a part of this great event. We want to thank our leadership, those who have come tonight to be supportive of this. And we want to thank you for tuning in and being with us. And we want you to know that the Greenville Avenue congregation is so very ready to be of assistance to you in whatever way that we can. May God bless you and may God keep you. And let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you in the name of Jesus for all of the great things that we have been able to witness tonight. We thank you to God for our brother in Christ, Brother Steve Diggs, for his wisdom that you have given to him and for allowing him to be with us. And we pray for he and his wife as they travel, that you would bless them with safety, allow them to find all things well. And we just pray to God that we might be better people for you as a result of hearing these messages. Keep us in your care. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Well, 'tis so sweet to trust in you, Jesus.